I made a rare visit to the internet ghetto of shit-flinging, howling monkeys known as Twitter, whose users are incapable of expressing themselves in more than however many characters the site allows. It's no wonder why Twitter skews towards a certain demographic that shall go unnamed, lest the powers that be end this account before it truly begins. Anyway, in a grand stroke of luck, I come across this tweet I've included in the video here. It's a tweet by a guy named Rick Remender. Not sure on the pronunciation because I refuse to take the effort to ensure him that level of respect. He states, "Without open immigration, I wouldn't have my wife or kids. Or our kids, rather. Immigration is American. Shitting on it is literally letting the monsters win." To which I replied, "Let's ask the Native Americans how open immigration worked out for them." Of course, I did not get a response. After this exchange, I decided to do a bit of research on this character. I found out that he is a writer and artist for comic books. In addition to being an obvious Marxist, he draws cartoon characters and makes them talk for a living. He doubles up on the cognitive dissonance. He deals exclusively within the realm of pure fantasy. But instead of bashing on his livelihood too harshly, let's instead take into account his words one part at a time. First sentence. Without open immigration, I wouldn't have my wife or kids. I'll let it be known that the country should, first and foremost, be concerned with its native-born citizens and their concerns. I'll also say that I am not opposed to all forms of immigration. That being said, the country should be highly selective of the outsiders it allows to become citizens. We must limit ourselves to those coming from nations with whom we share some degree of cultural compatibility. We must limit ourselves to those who are educated and or have a steady work history. And by educated, I refer to those who have degrees which prove productive capabilities. None of this queer poetry theory or Asian Chicano history bullshit. These subjects are, by origin, Marxist fields of study which serve no other purpose than to indoctrinate dim-witted 18-year-olds into perverse modes of thought introduced by the Frankfurt School, who were educated in these types of humanities and were foolishly allowed into America because the Nazis caught on to their hostility towards Western civilization. We hated the Nazis and wanted to destroy them, even if it also meant destroying ourselves as well. So these people were welcomed with open arms. We have never been the same. Barring humanities graduates from other nations would solve this problem of cultural destruction rather easily. Though judging from Remender's comments, it's looking like an effort which is too little and too late. This statement is a prime display of the ideology of the Prole, and why it's a huge mistake to grant them any degree of power. They are far too wrapped up in their own nonsense to ever be unwrapped from it. They're condemned by their myopic field of vision. What he's saying here is one step away from the argument that other people of his ilk have made regarding the same issue. We should let in more third-worlders because they have tasty food. Because diversity means having a fried insect stand next to a taco truck, next to another one on every corner. We can't get the recipes because, well, you're a racist. But in all seriousness, if they were interested at all in displaying any amount of honesty, they would tell us the real motivation behind their views stems from their hostility towards the host culture and insatiable desire to debase and destroy it, just as their Frankfurt School brethren have been doing for generations. Though I must say that crediting Remender with taking things to that extent would be giving him far more credit for his intelligence than he deserves. So let's move on to the second sentence, where he says, "Immigration is American." I've established in this video that Remender values others more than he values his own. If immigration were American, that would carry the suggestion that it's helpful and beneficial to Americans. I have established that here that in most cases it is not. This is a textbook example of doublethink stuffed inside an idiotic emotional appeal. But I suppose that according to him, because it gave him a wife and a couple of mutant children, that it's all square for everyone. Increased crime, poverty, and cultural displacement be damned. He got laid a few times and has a couple of trophies for his efforts. Congratulations, what an achievement. Also, do we honestly think that open borders advocates will ever willingly fly the American flag? Put a sticker of it on the bumper of their Prius? They label flag flying as bigoted and jingoistic, so that's highly doubtful. If it had the Obama logo or hammer and sickle where the stars used to be, maybe they'd be for it then. So we move on to the third sentence where he says, shitting on it is literally letting the monsters win. We are shown here how his juvenile line of work influences his juvenile worldview. Not only is his ideology steeped in proletarian myopia, he adds an additional layer of nerd myopia to it. He is capable only of rendering situations in his mind as battles of good and evil. Immigration is good because immigrants with tasty food and sexy women good. Americans wanting to preserve what little culture they have bad. Therefore, Americans equal evil. Evil equals monster. Checkmate. Now, where's my fedora? I could go on about whether the comic books manufactured his beliefs or whether his beliefs drew him into writing for comics, but the result is ultimately the same. One obviously influences the other in either case. While it's tempting to attack this way of thinking as being exclusive to the nerd mindset, that would be intellectually dishonest. Rather, this tweet is indicative of the mindset created by what all levels of the entertainment industry advocate. It's what I like to call the Hollywood mode of thought. For the sake of being thorough, I must say that I don't read comic books, so I cannot be entirely sure if the Hollywood mode of thought applies to them entirely. Though we see what seems to be dozens of superhero movies released every summer, so the two cannot be entirely opposed to one another. Anyway, in most Hollywood films you have a plot which features some manifestation of protagonist as well as an antagonist. This is typically set up in such a way where we feel sympathy for the protagonist because they are experiencing some form of hardship which is beyond their influence and control. In other words, they are pure victims. The antagonist is typically presented as an oppressor with no other motives than to oppress, removing any possibility that someone somewhere might identify with such a character. Proles like to drain much of their free time within the confines of a cinema, experiencing these types of stories and, in the end, adopting the victim-oppressor worldview because they lack the imagination to separate entertainment from reality. Hollywood takes full advantage of this in full. Oh, that's redundant. Anyway, the ideology of the Prole is no different than the ideology presented in Hollywood. Nerds who, like other leftist proles, predicate their existence on framing themselves as an oppressed group, though they take it to an extreme. Note the language used in the tweet. Shitting on it is literally letting the monsters win. And I ask, what literal monsters exist? They don't, so how can monsters literally win? They can't. Nerds take this largely imaginary battle between good and evil and apply it to other groups perceived as oppressed. Hardships of groups who they see as evil, or as the oppressors, do not matter if the hardships do not exist entirely. If those opposed to immigration were actual people with real motivations, they would cease to become monsters. All of a sudden, the nerd's worldview collapses. Things are no longer so simple. The greatest irony of all is that people espousing these viewpoints more often than not belong to the same groups and make themselves feel guilty for this. Thus, the reason for framing themselves as the oppressed. They don't want to resemble what they've labeled as monsters, so they attack the people that most closely resemble them. Remender is a perfect example of this. His illustrations, made possible by his profession, are his worldview, an ideology which falls in line with the ideology of men in spandex. Pathetic.